Okay. ¿Ninguna pregunta? Ok. Entonces ahora vamos a hablar de modo. Remember, we have the three things. Punto, modo y voz. We talked about punto, now we have talked about modo. Modo describe cómo fluye el aire cuando estamos articulando un sonido. El grado de obstrucción o el impedimento de aire al salir de al articular un sonido. Entonces, ciertos sonidos tienen mayor cierre, es como un continuo. Entonces, un continuo. Ciertos sonidos producen más cierre, más oclusión del aire. Tenemos las oclusivas como b, d, g y p, t, k. Tenemos las africadas como ch. En español solo tenemos una fricada en español, ch. En inglés tenemos dos, ch y j en inglés. Y nasales. Las nasales también producen mayor cierre, simplemente porque la nariz es más angosta, obviamente, que la boca. Menor cierre son las fricativas, los sonidos aproximantes, laterales y vibrantes. Entonces, es un continuo. And if I were to draw that continuum, I would probably draw it with, let me draw right here, with, sorry, on this end right here, you'd have, I don't want to write it out, that's annoying. Let me write it right here on my whiteboard. So on the mayor cierre and menor cierre. Mayor would be your oclusivas, and then all the way down, menor would be aproximantes. So I kind of had to squeeze that in there, and everything else is kind of squeezed somewhere in the middle here, but that's kind of like, it's like a continuum. It's not like binary or categorical. It does go on a continuum. So there are some approximates that are more closed than others, some occlusives that are more closed than others. But generally the occlusives are on one, mayor cierre and menor cierre aproximantes. Entonces, going back to that. So, muy bien. Entonces, diferentes grados de obstrucción. Entonces, tenemos algunos ejemplos. Complete closure, una oclusión completa. That would be a stop in English, or oclusiva in español. Close approximation, that'd be like a fricative. So going back up, a stop would be your b, d. That looks like it could be like a d in English, or a d in español if it's touching the teeth. That'd be a stop. So with that, it touches the, like in Spanish, your tongue touches your teeth for a brief, couple milliseconds, and then comes up. But for that brief millisecond or whatever, the air is completely blocked. And that sound that comes out is the sound we recognize. It's the little, soft explosion of air coming out as it's been trapped. So duh. And then as that air comes out, that's a stopper, una oclusiva. Close approximation, fricativa, so s or z en español, en inglés digo. También otro sonido fricativa en español sería, por ejemplo, en España, la Z, una fricativa también. Y luego approximate. An approximate is, a ver, in español, if you have the word dedo, that D that is between vowels is an approximate. Your tongue doesn't completely touch your teeth there. It shouldn't. So in English, we'd say dedo. So it'd be the same sound, dedo, in English. But in español, the first D is, if it's after a pause, is an oclusiva, but the one between the vowels is an approximate. So that tongue goes up to the teeth, but doesn't quite touch, so the air continues to flow. Dedo, dedo. And sometimes it's, the tongue doesn't move at all, and in some dialects of Spanish, it's just completely deleted. Dedo becomes deo. Cerrado becomes cerrao. Helada just becomes hela. And they just completely cut out that D between vowels right there. You find that in the Caribbean, you find that in Chile y otros lugares. Como mayormente en México no, pero si van a Veracruz o Tabasco van a ver eso también. Entonces, a ver, volviendo a eso. Entonces, oclusivas. So, P, B, T, D, K, G. Primero, there are two steps with an oclusiva. You have your cierre, so con P, P y B, tienen los labios, son sonidos bilabiales, fonemas bilabiales. Los labios tocan y cierran, crean un cierre. Entonces el aire está en la boca atrapado detrás de los labios. Y el segundo paso o el segundo elemento de una oclusiva es la explosión del aire al separar los articuladores. Entonces, say p, and then so when your mouth opens, that's when you hear the sound p or b. Entonces, with the b, you have your vocal cords too, but p, b, and then t, d, and then k. You can't see it with K and G, but you have your tongue, and the back of your tongue is hitting your velum right here, and the air is trapped in the back of your mouth, and then that explosion comes from the back of your mouth when your tongue is released. So, entonces, los sonidos oclusivos, los fonemas oclusivos tienen dos elementos, dos pasos. Primero, oclusión, o sea, el cierre, y luego la explosión. Entonces, y ese es de lo que se compone un sonido oclusivo. ¿Alguna pregunta sobre las oclusivas? ¿Ninguna pregunta?
Are they all the same in English? The T, would that one count as an occlusiva?
Yeah, in English there'll be an occlusiva too, but the punto de articulación is diferente in inglés. So in Spanish, the T and the D are dental, whereas in English, they're alveolar. So say the word like, just say like TikTok in Spanish. In English, TikTok, that T, the point of your tongue is touching our here, the kind of bony ridge behind your teeth, your alveolos. So their modo is the same in English and Spanish, but their punto is diferente, and that's what makes them sound a little bit different. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. K and G are the same in English, modo y punto. P and B are pretty much the same in English, except for P in English is a little bit more. Here's an exercise. So the difference between, voy a decir esto, a ver, voy a compartir esto, so text. We have the word in English, so pan, and then pan in español. Same modo, same punto, pero son un poco diferente. Cuando decimos pan in English, pan, there's more air coming out. And then pan, there should be no air coming out. It's just pan, pan, pan. So kind of hold your mouth, your hand. Everyone do this exercise. Hold your hand in front of your mouth. Say the word pan in English. Pan, pan. You feel that air coming out? Pan. Now, the way it should be pronounced in Spanish, obviously pan and pan are different words, but pan, pan, you should feel little to no air when you say pan in español, pan. That's why sometimes when we're English speakers learning Spanish, the Spanish P almost sounds like a B to us because there's that air doesn't come out. So pan in English, you have that pa, and then pan. And then you can hear if I pronounce everything the same in pan, except I have more of an explosion, that's where an accent comes out. So I'm like, yo quiero pan. You hear that? Quiero pan. That explosion of air is what gives us that, oh, yeah, you got an accent. Pan. Or quiero papas fritas. And really, you hear that. All that is more air coming out. So you limit that air coming out, and that P sounds more native. So papas fritas. So you hold your hand in front of your mouth again. Papas. And you shouldn't feel any air on the P's. You're going to feel air on the A and the S, but papas, you shouldn't feel any air coming out on the P's. So that's the difference between the Spanish and English P. Modo y punto are the same, just more air. The explosion is bigger on the English one than the Spanish one. And it makes all the difference. Like if I say por favor, and then I say the same thing, but the only difference being the air on the P, it sounds completely accented, kind of like that gringo accent. Por favor. Now you see that explosion of air right there. That's where the accent is perceived on the P. Preguntas? So you can practice. Another way that I've seen, I don't have a tissue here or anything, but the tissue is easily moved. So sometimes people, when teaching this, they hold a tissue in front of their mouth. And if you see it move, okay, tengo que trabajar en mi pronunciación de la P. ¿Ninguna pregunta sobre las oclusivas? ¿Ninguna? Okay. Este es un ejemplo. Hopefully, share sound. So this is what you call a spectrogram. So this is a sound wave up here, and this right here is what you call a spectrogram. This little kind of amorphous blob and the black and white blob. This can show with sound bands how your mouth and your tongue are moving to articulate sounds. So if we zoom in right here, you've got an occlusive D right there. And what you can see both elements of it right here. This white right here where there's less energy, that's the closure. So there's a brief shut off of that air. And so there's a closure and a stop, kind of a brief stop of energy. And then maybe if you could, I'll share my screen so you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor when I'm moving it around if I do it like this? Okay. Then if you see this little tiny thick line right after the white, can everyone see that? That's the explosion of air right there. So this circled portion right here, maybe move the yellow frame a little bit more to the right. But this right here, this little section right here is an acoustic representation of that D. And it shows the two parts of the ¿cómo se llama? The oclusiva. You have your closure, you see where there's less energy, and then you have your explosion, this dark band, vertical band of energy right here. It's brief, it's fractions and fractions of a second right there. Because this, I think it's zoomed into just less than a second or just a second and a half window right here. But that is acoustically what it looks like. So you can see that closure and the explosion right there of the D. And if we can hear it. Can you hear that? Let me turn it up. So you can hear, estoy viendo. So you can kind of hear the strong kind of occlusion. So, muy bien. ¿Alguna pregunta sobre la oclusiva? All right. Fricativas. And I admit, the first time I heard the word fricative, it almost sounded like a euphemism or almost like a, like, oh, get the fricative out of here or go, But fricative es cuando el paso del aire no se corta totalmente. El paso de aire es estrecho, so it's narrow. Hay turbulencia en la pronunciación. Sin embargo, no es como una oclusiva porque el paso del aire no se corta completamente como con las oclusivas. Dependiendo del sonido, el paso puede ser más estrecho que otro sonido. Por ejemplo, yo diría que f y s. No, I'd say like your F and your S are a little bit more they're a little bit more less, that the air is a little bit more tight than the G en gente, pero todavía se consideran fricativa porque el paso del aire no se corta, pero todavía hay turbulencia digo, en la pronunciación. Muy bien. Sí, a ver, is there, so for example, estuve viviendo. Okay, well, going back to the occlusives, here's an even better example. This right here, all of that, that's your T closure right there. And that explosion, those two bands right there, that's your explosion for the T. And she doesn't say her S, so I can't get a fricative out of here because it's Chilean Spanish and they cut their S's out. But normally you'd see for a fricative like an S, you'd see high bands of energy, like high energy right here in this upper part of the spectrum. Don't worry, you're not gonna have, there might be an extra credit question on this spectrum, but I just want to illustrate it acoustically to show you, where the energy is and show you that, it's high turbulence because the air is kind of still restricted, but not completely. Whereas here with an occlusive, there's like a stop of the energy because there's a brief closure and then a release. Entonces, algunos de estos, los fricativa del español son F, S, la Z en España y la velar, entonces la fricativa velar, G, de gente, entonces. ¿Preguntas sobre la fricativa? If I go to page, let me quickly go to page, let me pull up the book and show you some of the examples I want to show from the book. Okay, so page 60. Right. Okay, so we've got an example in the book. If you've got the second edition, it's page 60. Let me share that. So here are some fricativas. Right here, you've got your S and your F right here. And we see that with the S and the F, there's no complete closure. The energy is less intense, than with the A and then like the vowels and everything, because it's still restricted. So it's less intense energy. Whereas with the vowel, the ah, if you say ah, your mouth is open, ah, and there's almost nothing impeding that air from coming out. So therefore the energy registers is darker or stronger. The F, the energy is still there, but it's much more restricted. So it's lighter. And with like for the S, for example, it manifests itself sometimes in this upper area of the spectrum. So you have la foca saca, whatever that means. La foca saca. So I don't think I think they're just making things up. So I mean that the foca saca that the seal takes out, but I mean it doesn't make any sense. La foca saca, and then you see once again with that stop right there, the two parts, you have a complete, lack of energy here because of the closure, and then that explosion right there with the stop. So the difference is you compare your stop with your fricatives, you do have restricted energy in your fricatives, but not to the extent with the stops, because the stops you have a complete closure. With the fricatives, you still have complete flow, just it's through a tighter space than with like a vowel or something. Preguntas sobre la fricativa? Is this all making sense with the spectrograms kind of showing it?
Could you
Getting the dope?
explain
Mhm.
the theta symbol? I didn't really understand
Oh yeah,
why they use that.
The theta symbol is your interdental, like so like your Z and your CI and your CE in Spain. So saying like zapatos. So it's like putting your like when we say the word like three, it's that TH sound at the beginning of the word three. That's a fricative. Because there's not a complete closure. There's still some restriction of the air, but it's not a complete closure like a stop. So these are the fricative sounds in Spanish. Your bilabial, your labiodental, labiodental, your dorsoalveolar, interdental or just dental, and then velar. So those are the four symbols for the fricatives. Fricative phonemes, in this case, they're written as allophones, but we'll say phonemes right now in Spanish. Does that make sense? Was that your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so those are just, yeah. So here we have 6 oclusivas in Spanish, PT, PTK, and BDG, just like in English. And we have 4 fricatives in Spanish. Labiodental, dorsalveolar, algo así, interdental y velar. ¿Preguntas sobre la fricativa? So if you want to confuse your parents when you go back home or something, stub your toe and go, fricative, and see what they say to that. They'll be like, I feel I should be correcting you, but I don't know what that was. Entonces, muy bien. At least that's what I thought the first time I heard the word fricative. So, muy bien. Okay, africada. Tenemos modo africada. Una africada tiene 2 fases. So it's kind of like a stop, has 2 phases, but it's a little bit different. So the first phase is like a stop where you have oclusión completa. Entonces with ch, complete occlusion of that air, ch. And then segundo, instead of an explosion, it's more of a ch. It flows out more like, instead of it flows out more like a fricative rather than a stop. So there's not an explosion after ch. It's more like a flow of air. So the dos fases, like you think of an africada, it's an oclusiva, starts as an oclusiva and ends as a fricative. Entonces, y solo hay un fonema africado. Remember, we're still talking about phonemas. We're not talking about the phonetic representation. We're talking about the mental representation still. So, even though that's written as an allophone. So, una africada empieza como oclusiva y termina como fricativa. En chico, por ejemplo. En inglés tenemos 2, ch y j, like chump y jump. Entonces, en inglés tenemos 2 africadas. En español tenemos un fonema africado. Preguntas sobre, entonces, africado, un sonido africado empieza como sonido oclusivo, termina como sonido fricativo. A ver, vamos a ver. Okay. I'm trying to find an example of a spectrogram. I guess they don't have a spectrogram here of a chus, of an africada. No, no tienen de una africada. No, okay. So I could actually probably do it. Let me try it. Okay, so this is the program that we're using. Let me see if it'll record me. Record mono sound. Ch, ch, ch. Okay. And now, okay, you're not seeing that. Okay, so now this is what I just did with the spectrogram. So this is the ch sound. So you see, it starts out with that closure right here. It starts out with the closure. So you have your closures right here, here, and here. And then instead of an explosion, you see it comes out more like a fricative. If I zoom in, you see it's kind of like that. I should tell you the energy's in the upper region right there. And it's not an explosion like with the PT and K, BD, and G, because the explosions with those are really short. This comes out more as a fricative. It's more prolonged and it's less explosive. Entonces, so your africale empieza como oclusiva con la oclusión completa y termina como fricativo, sonido fricativo con el paso del aire. Pregunta? Does that make sense? Can everyone kind of see the differences there? Sí, no, maybe so. Okay. Entonces vamos a seguir. Let's go. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Modo aproximantes. Okay. Los articuladores se aproximan, entonces, se aproximan. Aunque hay obstrucción, es muy limitada la obstrucción y no hay turbulencia. Mayormente ocurre cuando estos tres sonidos, tres sonidos, b, d, g, en español, ocurren entre vocales. So if you have one of those, a B or D or a G between vowels, those are the allophonic symbols. So don't worry about those symbols right now because we haven't gone over allophones yet. If they're between vowels, then they become aproximantes. Entonces, en vez de aba, es aba. Lavaba is lavaba, en vez de lavaba. Ada, aga. We have examples of it. So you see right here, the difference between, you have an occlusive over here, occlusive D, because it over here, in the example of estoy viviendo, with the cierre and the explosion. And then you have two B's over here that are between vowels that the energy basically you see doesn't change. And that's because there's no obstruction of the air the way she's saying. In fact, I would say she's almost deleted some of those B's right there. Estuve viendo. So it's like estuve, instead of estuve, it becomes estuve. Estuve viendo. We listen to it.
Estuve viviendo.
So you can kind of hear that they're still there. But as you see the difference between an approximant and a stop. So you have the two extremes right here. Complete closure, complete impediment of the air, as opposed to like almost nothing right here. You see the energy changes very little. It dips a little bit. You see a little bit of a dip right here. A little bit of a dip right here in the bands of energy, and maybe a little bit of a dip, the rectangles covering it. Pero con un aproximante, los articuladores se aproximan, pero el aire tiene casi libre paso por la boca, entonces no se impide casi para nada. ¿Alguna pregunta sobre las aproximantes? And these are the symbols, you can write them down for the aproximantes in español, but mayormente it's going to be the B, D, and the G in a specific context, and that context is between vowels. Specifically, between vowels is where you're going to see that. ¿Pregunta sobre aproximante? Aproximante. El modo aproximante. Ok. Modo nasal. Los labios están completamente cerrados, and where we get the most of the sound coming from is coming up. You see the velo baja, el velo o el paladar suave o blando baja, y el aire, en vez de pasar por la boca, mayormente pasa por la nariz. So that's where we get that sound. So the air is not, most of the air is not coming out of the mouth. Most of the air is coming out of the nose. Entonces. Y eso es el modo nasal. Entonces. And we have, I mean, three nasal phonemes in Spanish. So, and so these are the nasal phonemes in Spanish. They're the phonemes. You have your alveolar, you have your palatal, and you have your bilabial. So, n, ñ, y m. Those are the phonemes, the nasal phonemes in Spanish. The approximantes, there are no approximante phonemes in Spanish. When we get to allophones, we'll go over kind of the symbols for those. Entonces, preguntas sobre modo nasal. Ninguna pregunta sobre modo nasal. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah, go for it.
The letters that it does have is like N and then NA and M. Sorry.
Yeah. N, ñ, y m. So
Thank you.
your N, your ñ, and your M. Muy bien. ¿Más preguntas? ¿Ninguna pregunta más? So everyone's ready for the final? No preguntas? No? I can just give you the midterm right now and we'd be good to go. Okay. Muy bien. Hablando de los nasales, aunque su principal punto de articulación es apico-alveolar, hay varios puntos de articulación dependiendo del contexto posterior y el dialecto. So we'll go over this when we do our allophones, but you do have a lot of variations of nasals in Spanish, because what nasals tend to do in Spanish is they're very good at assuming the point of articulation of the following consonant. Entonces, la consonante posterior, su punto de articulación muchas veces determina el punto de articulación de una nasal anterior. Entonces, por ejemplo, en la palabra cantar, esa N, de hecho, no es una N alveolar, es una N dental. So that N is produced dentally with your tongue against your teeth, because the following consonant is a T. Whereas with tango, that's a velar N, because that G has a velar point of articulation. So your N assimilates its place of articulation. And that's just for ease of speech. Try saying tango without doing that. Say tango. So what happens there is your tongue goes up, hits your alveolar ridge, and then it has to like retract and then go back into your velum. And that es mucho esfuerzo articulatorio si estamos hablando de una conversación en la que solo quiero relatar información lo más rápido posible. Tango. So tango, that assimilation is just a natural thing that happens cuando hablamos. It's like, try saying esto. Un beso. When you say that, what happens to that N on un? Is it alveolar, or where's the punto de articulación si digo un beso? What happens to that? Say it, just un beso. Where does your N? Your N turns into something. What does it turn into right there? Where's this punto de articulación? Do you say un beso or un beso? A ver. Voluntarios o víctimas. Un beso. ¿Qué pasa con el punto de articulación de la N cuando hay una bilabial después? Un beso.
It kind of sounds like a M more than M.
And it is. It becomes a bilabial nasal right there. Un beso. Because ease of articulation. Un beso. The same thing happens if you say un peso. Un peso instead of un peso. Do we do that in English? Let me see. Ham. No. I'm trying to think of no, because I'm trying to think of Stan Band. Yeah, we had like Stan. If they say there's a guy named Stan Bernstein or something, that's the only example I can think of. Stan Bernstein. Yeah, that N at the end of Stan kind of becomes an M. Stan Bernstein. Wait, at least in my, California surfer dialect. I don't know about Texas. Entonces. Muy bien. Y luego el dialecto determina eso también. En algunos dialectos, por ejemplo, es una N apical alveolar, pan, pero si vamos al Caribe, Perú, Andalucía, Asturias, it becomes pan. So if you see the word like ding, like ding a door, like ding dong, that sound, it's also a last name in some Asian languages. It's just an NG. It's pronounced And so en el Caribe, Perú, Andalucía, Asturias, a veces dicen, en su dialecto dicen pan, en vez de pan, like ping pong. Entonces el modo nasal varía. The nasals assimilate a lot, and there's a lot of dialectal variation. We'll go over that throughout this chapter. ¿Preguntas sobre el modo nasal? ¿Ninguna pregunta?
So is the N, in the example we were looking at earlier, estoy bebiendo, is that nasal that just takes on the stop from the D?
Yeah, and what's interesting is, so that'll be a dental N right there, and that N almost acts, because it's a dental N, if you remember the articulation right there, you see how the air in the mouth is completely blocked off. That'll act as the closure for the D in a lot of cases, in all cases. So yeah, that would be a dental D right there, a dental N right there, because of the D that follows it. Does that make sense? Muy bien. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Muy bien, ok. Muy bien. Laterales. Entonces tenemos estos dos fonemas, aunque están escritos ahora como alófono, pero tenemos dos fonemas laterales en el español. Son estos. Y se escriben así. I have them written a little bit differently in the slideshow that because we haven't gone over allophones yet. So make sure you're still writing as phonemes with the slashes. Pero hay dos fonemas laterales. Y dice lateral porque el aire pasa por los lados de la lengua. Entonces, si dicen lado, you see that you feel the air wrapping around your tongue. Lado, lado. And this one right here is the kind of difficult one. ¿Hay alguien aquí que esté familiarizado con con portugués, que hable un poco de portugués, que entienda? Nadie. Italiano. Nada, italiano. Bueno, este sonido, este lateral, existe en ciertos dialectos del español, incluyendo Madrid y las regiones andinas de América Latina. Pero es como, para producir ese sonido, como empiecen con una L. Entonces, just make an L, a prolonged L. Go, and then try to make that same sound, but using the middle of your tongue up against your hard palate. So instead of saying llover, say it like llover. That's kind of how let me go to, I'll show the sounds of Spanish, or the sounds of speech thing from Iowa. Sounds of speech. All right. Vamos a ver la diferencia. Entonces aquí tenemos nuestra consonante lateral aquí. We're just going to go with these two for now. So this is your regular L. Entonces, se produce obviamente de forma apical-alveolar apical-alveolar, y el aire fluye por los lados de la lengua. Por eso se dice lateral, because it's kind of like through the the lateral side, past the sides of it, because that's how the air flows. Pero si, a ver. Ok, si examinamos esto, una fricativa, este es una fricativa palatal, o lateral palatal. It's different. So, lluvia. Es difícil pronunciar ese sonido y está presente, y de hecho, italiano, portugués y varias lenguas indígenas, por ejemplo, está presente en esas lenguas también. Pero no está presente en todos los dialectos del español, solo en ciertas regiones. Como les dije, las regiones andinas. And the reason it's present in like some of the Andean regions is because of influence from languages like Quichua and Quechua, which have it as a phoneme as well. And so you have people who speak Quichua and Quechua, who also speak Spanish, and that has come into Spanish. Also, there used to be a distinction in medieval Spanish between l and l. So that is another reason why it still somewhat exists. You do find it in Madrid as well, in Madrileño Spanish. So llama, caballo, calle, callo, lluvia, en vez de lluvia, llama, caballo, cosas así. Muy bien. ¿Más pregunta? ¿Ninguna pregunta más? ¿Ninguna pregunta más? Okay. Let's go back to... and real quickly, I forgot to add one. Add this symbol for your fricatives and your fricative phonemes in Spanish. I gotta add this. But this would be punto. It's kind of like a curly Q J, and it's on the table 2.11. But that's your palatal fricative, your y sound. In places that don't do the y or the sh, this is just the regular y sound. Oh, come on. There you go, the regular y sound. So that should be on table 2.11. Gotta update this PowerPoint. Okay. Muy bien. Y ahora vibrantes. Las vibrantes. Entonces, tienen vibrante simple y vibrante múltiple. Entonces, según un golpe, vibrante simple, 2 a 3 a 4, 5, 6 golpes, vibrante múltiple. So this is your single R, this is your double R. Make sure you get the symbols right. Single R is just has no little stem up top. Double R has that stem up top. And be consistent. The double R is written as different phonetic symbols. Just pick one and be consistent with it. But if we're going to look at it, la diferencia, a ver, entre los dos, we have our single R right here.
Yeah.
Y eso como en inglés, cuando decimos la palabra party, that T is kind of pronounced as a single R in Spanish. Party, como cero, amar, triste, caro.
Yeah.
And then mi favorito, la vibrante múltiple. And they're really physiologically not the same sound. You can't just do a single R really fast and get the r. They're different muscular movements. R, r. So you can't just go and eventually do a double R. You can't say like voy a correr, and say voy a correr. Son movimientos musculares diferentes. Pero hay alguna persona que tratan de enseñar la vibrante múltiple a la persona que no sepan y dicen que solo tiene que hacer muy rápido, pero eso no es, porque son movimientos musculares distintos. Entonces, pero son vibrantes simplemente. Es interesante con vibrante. Cuando digo golpe, me refiero a cierres muy breves. So let me record. I'll record another thing real quickly so you can see it, the difference. See, record. Okay, so correr, pero. Okay, save the list. And now we'll look at it. So let's zoom in. This right here, right there, if we zoom in a little more, let's just do this right here. This is your vibrante múltiple. So, can you hear that? That's my tongue. And that is my tongue. Every time it hits, you have a closure of energy. No energy goes through. So you see there's gaps. That's every time it's hitting the alveolar ridge. And every time it's coming off of it, that's those bands of energy you see going up and down right there. So we can see that right here as well. This is a long one right here. So you see tongue hits, tongue releases, tongue hits, tongue releases, tongue hits, tongue releases, tongue hits, tongue releases, tongue hit. And so they're really brief. That's a vibrante. And so the different way of the air coming out, it's coming out in these really fast spurts. Por eso son vibrantes. But if I go to pero. This right here is your single R. So it's just one tap. And it's not even, and there's no really real loss of energy. You see a dip in energy, but there's no complete closure of energy right there. And right here, you can see the P, here's the closure and the release. And I would say that's a little bit long for a Spanish P. So if I've done study like phonetic studies where I compare my P's to my wife's, and no matter how much I try, hers are always shorter because she's a native speaker. And so there's that element that'll always be there from English. But William, but we can see this is an R, a single R right here, a vibrante simple. So we zoom in, zoom out, you see it's very short, but it's a dip in energy, but it's not complete. Like if you see over here, they're different muscular movements right there because you see what the way the energy is distributed and comes through as well. Pregunta sobre la vibrante. ¿Ninguna pregunta sobre la vibrante? Everyone just entranced by the glory of all of this. Ok, muy bien, excelente, eso es lo que esperaba. Ok, entonces ya terminamos con modo. ¿Alguna pregunta general sobre modo? Tenemos punto y ahora tenemos modo para clasificar la consonante. ¿Ninguna pregunta sobre punto y modo? ¿Ninguna pregunta sobre punto y modo? Ok, entonces tenemos voz ahora, o sea, la actividad de las cuerdas vocales. Entonces una consonante consiste en punto, modo y voz. Y voz se refiere a la actividad de las cuerdas vocales. Los pliegues vocales o las cuerdas vocales son, they're right here, son pares de ligamentos musculares que se encuentran en ambos lados de la laringe. Ya sabemos todos dónde están. Pueden juntarse y separarse al pasar el aire de los pulmones. Sonido sonoro. So you have voiced and voiceless. Sonoro y sonido. Sonoro y sordo. Consonants. Sonoro or voiced es una consonante que se produce con vibración del aire en las cuerdas vocales. So your b, g, if you can put your hand on your vocal cords and you feel vibration, those are voice sounds. Sonido sordo es producido con las cuerdas sonoras o las cuerdas vocales separadas durante su pronunciación, sin vibración. So you do an S sound or an F, there's no vibration. Your vocal cords are deactivated. Y eso es un sonido, una consonante sorda. Una consonante sonora es cualquier consonante que se produzca con vibración del aire en la cuerda vocales. So to classify a sound, if I had this symbol right here, I would classify it as, obviamente, consonante. And its punto would be bilabial, modo oclusiva, y voz sonora. So if I'm going to classify the sound, it goes like that. Consonante, then punto bilabial, modo oclusiva, y luego voz sonora. If I were to change, if I were to change that to this right here, which one of these things would change if I changed the B to a P? A ver. Bueller. Which one would change? Is P bilabial? Sí o no? P is bilabial. Is it an oclusiva? Sí, una oclusiva. So then you would change voz. To just change it, it would be consonante bilabial sorda. Entonces, porque la única diferencia entre P y B para los efectos de esta clase es la acción de las cuerdas vocales, la actividad de las cuerdas vocales. B sonoro es un fonema sonoro y P un fonema sordo. Entonces, ¿pregunta hasta ahí?
So you say that P is voiceless?
Yeah, P is voiceless. If you just say P, just a P, not P, because that afterwards is a vowel. Just go P, P, P. There's no.
Okay.
There's nothing in the vocal cords. Whereas if I say B, B, it starts out, the vocal cords are moving. So A ver, ¿cuáles son algunos ejemplos de sonidos sonoros y sordos? Pueden pensar. Primero, sonidos sonoros. And this is easy. You just say it with your vocal cords. So, rrr, los vibrantes son sonoras. Las vibrantes son sonoras. ¿Qué tal? T, t, t. ¿Sorda o sonora? T, t. ¿Sonido sonoro o sordo?
Sordo.
Sordo, exacto. ¿Qué tal? D, 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 d. Sonoro, sonoro, exacto. ¿Qué tal? Ch, 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 ch. Not ch, sino ch, ch, ch.
Sordo.
Sordo, exacto. So this is the great part about this class. You can, it's not cheating if you're on the test, just like, okay, sordo, something, you're testing it out. It's like, you have your vocal cords, you're born with them, use them on the test. So, muy bien. ¿Qué tal un sonido más? La L. ¿Sorda la L o sonora?
Sonoro.
Yeah, L es un sonido sonoro. Muy bien. Excelente. Okay. And that's the difference in English. I was telling you how the S and the Z in English are phonemes. And the only difference between the two is actividad de las cuerdas vocales. So sonoro, zzz, no, other way around. Sordo, zzz, sonoro. Entonces, so a lot of times these phonemes will the only difference will be something as small as las cuerdas vocales. Entonces, de actividad de las cuerdas vocales. ¿Pregunta sobre modo y voz? ¿Ninguna pregunta? Okay, what I want you to do now, do this individually. The underlined sound, I want you to transcribir y tiene que transcribir. So give the symbol, and we're not doing the brackets yet. We're just doing the slashes. We're talking about phonemes. I want you to classify the sound, the underlying sounds. So they're all consonants. I want modo, punto, y voz for each of them. So for example, burro is that symbol in slashes because we're not using the brackets yet. And it would be reversed here. I should have put bilabial. I'm just going to fix that because that's annoying me. Bilabial oclusiva sonora. That's the way we have it for this class. Okay. So for a B, for B, like I just showed you, it'd be, it's a consonante bilabial oclusiva sonora. Entonces, that's how I want you to classify these sounds. Each one that is underlined. Entonces, so remember, we're just using the slashes right now. So individualmente, le voy a dar como 5 minutos y luego podemos repasar las respuestas. So I'll mute my mic and go ahead and just classify each one of the underlined sounds. I'll give you about 4 or 5 minutes.